Alright boys, welcome back to Bettrmma, the best ASMR on MMA YouTube. This video is going to be speaking about 5 up-and-coming UFC fighters that are going to be ranked and will be forces in their division very soon. 5 young up-and-comers who have shown promise in their UFC fights, and we are going to break down their style advantages for their divisions and how far I see them going in the UFC. So we are going to get it started with that boy, Chuck Buffalo, Charles motherfucking Radke. Now, Charles Radke has one of the best personalities in the UFC right now, if you ask me. He's notoriously known for, after he beat Blood Diamond, all the Aussies booing him. He said, "Hey, all you faggots could come down here and get it." You know, and that was very based. Very funny from Charles Radke. I like that type of energy from fighters in general. When they're getting boos, they're just like, hey, come get some. You know, I like that type of energy. And the next time Daniel Cormier interviewed him at the Apex after he knocked out Urbina, he said to DC, "You nervous?" You know, so he shows that he has some self-awareness. He's a smart guy. He has some self-awareness, some perspective. And if you follow him on Instagram, you can tell that he's a very big Nick Diaz fan, talking about how you have to hate this fight game enough to love it. And I think when certain fighters are adopting that sort of mentality, it really shows you that this is sort of like the only thing they have as a person. And I think that's like a really beautiful and real thing for a lot of these fighters, is that if they didn't have this fight game, it would be life gets very, very hard for them on a day-to-day. To see Charles Radke embracing it, I think it's a great thing. More to his logistics as a fighter, the guy is continuously participating in grappling matches outside of his UFC fights. So it's always good to see a fighter who is competing in other competitions like grappling to get some more experience, work on that specific skill set, and develop as a fighter. He is also training with Belal Muhammad. I'm by no means a Belal Muhammad fan. You could call me a Belal Muhammad hater, and I wouldn't mind it at all. I legitimately wouldn't care if they cut him from the UFC. I want them to cut Belal Muhammad from the UFC. Genuinely. He is the modern day Antonio McKee. If you're not familiar with Antonio McKee, there's a reason why we kept him out of the UFC. Belal Muhammad is proof of that reason. Bettrmma speaks up for these issues, and if I was running the UFC, you would not see a Belal Muhammad in the UFC, or an Antonio McKee. Dana White and the Fertittas have lost their way over the years. But going to Chuck Buffalo, he is getting in good rounds with Belal Muhammad. He's obviously working with some tough veteran UFC fighters, and getting that sort of level of experience as a young prospect, I think is one of the most valuable things a young prospect could get for in the UFC. Too many times, young prospects get signed to the UFC, get a couple of wins, and think, yeah, they just need to stay at their small camp. They don't need to branch out anywhere else. They don't need to get new experiences. There's no need for them to do that because they're already on a win streak in the UFC. So to see Chuck Buffalo putting himself in so many different positions to learn from different people, I think it's a really good thing for his career. And above all, the guy has a really entertaining, fun fighting style. Even though he's obviously working on his grappling outside of the cage, when it comes to inside the cage, this dude likes to walk you down and throw big hook combinations. He's looking to put you out up against the cage, and that's exactly what he did in his last fight versus Urbina. What shows me a lot of promise with Charles Radke is the fact that he has more than decent boxing defense when he throws these big shots, and that's simply a very, very dangerous thing in modern MMA. If you have a strong, durable guy with knockout power who is walking you down and he's not open to get countered frequently, that's going to be a big problem. Those shots mean a lot in MMA when you're wearing 4-ounce gloves. And if Charles Radke can get the correct matchups against these UFC welterweights that don't have the best boxing defense, he's going to be going on a KO streak, and before you know it, he's going to be in the top 15 and possibly the top 10. I could very well see him putting the hands and shitting Ian Gary, the way Ian Gary is getting sent on his ass by dudes like Song Kanan. Charles Radke is going to put the pressure on dude, and he's going to make him feel his power. So I see a lot of success in the future for Charles Radke. Say it again, my brother. Say it again. Say it again. Next up is Joshua Van. Now, Joshua Van, I think, has the highest potential here to be a UFC champion, and that's simply by the fact that he is in the most shallow division. So he has the highest potential because he's also extremely young. This guy isn't even 25 years old yet. He's from Myanmar, so you know they are built tough in Myanmar. If you're not familiar, that is where Lethwei is originated from, is from Myanmar. And it is one of the most brutal combat sports and one of the most brutal combat sport regions in the world. And I think that shows in Joshua Van's fighting style. The dude throws heavy shots. Almost everything he throws is practically with 100%. He has a very high guard, pressure boxing type of style. Could be compared to a Peter Yan, even though the skill differential is very present in terms of those boxing levels. Joshua Van incorporates good knees in the clinch, and he has a good, durable build at flyweight, which is very promising to see, because there isn't much that we can see from him right now outside of maybe the grappling, where we can see Joshua Van having a big weakness in his game. But like I said, he's an extremely young fighter, and he's obviously very determined to put on for Myanmar, and I think he's going to have an extremely successful UFC career, no matter if he becomes champion or not. He's going to start ushering in the new age of the flyweight division, and you're going to see Joshua Van in the top 10 of the UFC flyweight division within 12 to 16 months' time, without a doubt. He just got matched up with Sumaderji, which I think is an absolutely great matchup. Sumaderji is a very tricky fighter for a lot of the flyweights, and Maderji is currently ranked number 15. We can see Joshua Van be moved up into the top 15 with a win here. He's going to get these opportunities because the flyweight division is ripe for opportunity. As we see with these guys like Tatsuro Taira, Muhammad Makayev, the UFC is happy to move them up the rankings. I see Joshua Van being able to beat a lot of guys in the top 15 quite easily. Guys like David Dvorak, Matt Schnell, especially with how chinny we see Matt Schnell is now. And I'd also give him a great chance up against Mateusz Nicolau. Mateusz Nicolau has really paid his dues in the UFC, but Mateusz is an extremely cookie-cutter style fighter. When Mateusz Nicolau fought Brandon Royval, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that Brandon Royval was going to finish Mateusz Nicolau in that fight. This is the same logic that I applied to Yuri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic. When you have such a cookie-cutter style MMA fighter that is not extremely good in one aspect of the game or another, when they are going up a dangerous wild card fighter who is well-rounded in all areas and could arguably be better than them in one of those areas, it's only a matter of time until the wild card fighter catches their mark. Why? Because they're taking more chances throughout the fight. Obviously, the grapplers in the flyweight division are going to give Joshua Van some trouble, but as long as he's able to get favorable stand-up matchups, Joshua Van is going to be pushed up into the UFC rankings, and we could see him fighting for title contending matches within 12 months here. Now, next up on this list is another great up-and-coming fighter and another great up-and-coming personality, Joe Anderson Brito. Now, Joe Anderson Brito, rightfully so, already has a little cult fan base because this guy is absolutely hilarious. I mean, he's pulling on gloves, pulling on the shorts, grabbing the fence during his fights. When JSP is saying, "Ref, look at him, look at what he's doing," Joe Anderson Brito is going, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, check out those clips if you have not seen them. And please watch his fight versus JSP, Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan Pierce is trying to country style grapple grape him the entire fight and is starting to talk trash and say, get up and do something, get up and do something, you know. And Joe Anderson Brito, being the Brazilian savage he is, does exactly that and gets up and throws this dude in a ninja choke, sort of like a modified guillotine. More than anything, it should show the resolve and how dangerous Joe Anderson Brito is when he was getting really dominated through the majority of that fight through Pierce's wrestling. The resolve he had to get back up to his feet and then immediately slap on a choke like that, that's a very, very good sign for an up-and-coming UFC fighter when it shows you that they have that finishing IQ at all times. This dude, Joe Anderson Brito, came onto the scene having an absolute dogfight with Diego Lopez on the Contender Series. Now, if you ask me, I truly believe that Diego Lopez, with the momentum he's carrying right now, is at least a top 10. I think could be a top 5 level UFC fighter. And I could even see him giving Ilia Topuria such a tough fight because he is such an interesting stylistic matchup when it comes to the grappling. I think Diego Lopez is one of, if not the most dangerous Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist in the 145-pound division right now. And I would love to see him put that to the test up against the higher level competition. But in regards to Brito, this guy's an absolute firecracker. If you have not watched his fight with Diego Lopez on the Contender Series, it's free on YouTube. And he opens up this fight with a flying knee to a takedown on Diego Lopez, which is a ballsy move in the first place because Lopez is a jiu-jitsu specialist. Brito throws insanely hard ground and pound shots all throughout the fight on Diego Lopez, seriously beats him up on the ground. Diego Lopez, by the end of the first round, tries throwing up an armbar on Brito. Brito is able to defend against it, which again is very impressive to do against Diego Lopez. And once they get on the feet, Brito is able to establish a very strong jab and good leg kicks. And the guy has an insanely good 1-2-3 combination. And his left hook that he throws at the end of his 1-2-3 is a very, very hard shot. In the second round of their fight, he was still very good on the feet, established his jab and his leg kicks, and threw some great ground and pound shots once the fight got to the ground. Diego Lopez was able to attempt a guillotine and some other submissions, but Brito was able to fight through it, which is very, very impressive when you consider how good Diego Lopez is. The fact that those guys fought on the Contender Series together shows what a gem of a fight that is in MMA history, because I do believe both of these guys have very bright futures in the featherweight division. Once he made his debut, he knocked out Andre Fili in under a minute. Now, that fight was a big overhand right, and at the end of the day, it was Brito finding that opening in Andre Fili's defense, which we've seen in his career now against also Dan Ige. So you could say that, oh, that might be a fluky finish, but on the other hand, it has legitimacy, as we've seen in Andre Fili's career. It is a shot that he is open to, and the fact that Brito was able to make that read so early, you could only give credit to Brito. After that, he had a stellar performance against Lucas Alexander. Lucas Alexander wanted to stand on the feet. Brito was like, nah, we're not having any of that. Got the dude's back super quick. Rear naked choke for first round submission. Really showed levels in his fight against Lucas Alexander and showed that Lucas Alexander is not on that UFC level, and Brito most definitely is. He then got a first round ground and pound TKO finish over Weston Wilson, but if you're not getting a first round TKO finish over Weston Wilson, you do not belong in the UFC whatsoever. I think Weston Wilson is arguably the worst fighter that has ever been signed by the UFC. I swear to God, anybody can knock this guy out. Weston Wilson is genuinely one of those dudes where anybody who is not a UFC fighter can knock this dude out. And realistically, you could put a guy who's just angry and likes to hit people in the cage versus Weston Wilson, and that is a 50-50 fight with all of the training Weston Wilson has when it comes to jiu-jitsu, grappling, MMA training. This guy has a -50 when it comes to his boxing defense. He's got no chin whatsoever. He's got horrible stand-up, and is literally a human punching bag. I have no idea why the UFC signed him other than just trying to do Wonderboy Thompson a favor by signing their friend. Weston Wilson, one of the worst UFC fighters of all time. Here at Better MMA, we keep it real 100% of the time. If Weston Wilson wants to do an interview, or if I ever met that dude in real life, I would keep it 100 and say, yeah, dude, you are nowhere close to being UFC level, and I can knock you out. I can knock you out, bro. Getting back to Joe Anderson Brito, he's got a first-round knockout win over a vet like Andre Fili. He has finishes in all of his UFC fights. And he technically has a win over Diego Lopez because he won the first 2 rounds against Diego Lopez. The future is extremely bright for Joe Anderson Brito. Great personality as always. So I really see the stars have aligned for him in the UFC. And I know this guy is going to go far. Brito is going to see the top 10 and hopefully some higher level matchups sometime soon. And before I move on off of Brito, he also has a win over Chepe Mariscal. And as we see with Chepe Mariscal is putting a halt to all of these little hype trains in the featherweight division. He's putting an end to all the little sideshow bobs in the featherweight division, showing that Chepe is a real, legit fighter. I really like Chepe Mariscal. And the fact that Joe Anderson Brito has a win over him as well. Joe Anderson Brito is really one of the big dogs in the UFC that is getting slept on right now. And if you don't have your radar on for him, you definitely should. Next dude I want to talk about, you guys should already know he's on the come up. Rinat Fikhretdinov. This guy actually has an upcoming grappling match with Craig Jones. And I think that's incredible that he's having grappling matches with such high level guys. Like these other dudes like Charles Radke, he's consistently doing grappling matches outside of the UFC, trying to grow as a fighter. And one thing that I really want to give Rinat credit for off the bat is that he is 22-2 in his UFC career right now. But unlike a lot of his Russian and Caucasus Mountain counterparts, he does not have an inflated or padded record whatsoever. If you take a look at the opponents that he's faced on his Tapology, you'll see that all throughout his career, he's faced a proper challenge in all of his fights. Of course, he got a unanimous decision over Brian Battle. And in my opinion, I think Brian Battle is a more than decent MMA fighter. So I think that Rinat showed levels in his performance against Brian Battle. Of course, he followed that up with absolutely embarrassing Kevin Lee, knocking his ass to the ground and then slapping on a guillotine choke, all with under a minute. Rinat Fikhretdinov really shows that he's about that business, and he's not just a grappler. The guy has heavy hands and he will put it on you. And what I like about Rinat Fikhretdinov is that he does have this bigger sort of middleweight sort of frame that you like to see it with these modern welterweight fighters. It shows how much the game is developing once we've got these 6-foot guys with 74-inch reaches in the welterweight division. He's technically taller and has a longer reach than Paulo Costa, so he's a big dude. If he really puts on a show and dusts up Nicholas Dalby, they'll definitely be giving him a top 15 matchup if he finishes. I'm very interested to see how he would do up against a Jack Della Maddalena. Would the hands be too much for him? He definitely has a lot of potential, and I look forward to seeing him up against the ranked top 15. Last dude on this list is Mateusz Rebecki. He is a grappling-based fighter, and in the lightweight division, that will get you very far. You know, Rebecki has some sort of suspicion with his physique that he is possibly on the sauce, and I think this could be the same for Charles Radke and Joe Anderson Brito. But if you guys are familiar with Better MMA, I actually think that steroids should be legalized in the UFC and that we should actually adopt a transparency policy and perhaps a natty league and an enhanced league, and instead of testing to make people cheat, we just don't serve any sort of punishments, and we make it transparent and legalized because it is part of the nature of the beast of MMA that guys will go on steroids. If you haven't seen my video on legalizing steroids in the UFC and how we should go about it and what it would do to improve the sport, please go check it out. I think it's time that I possibly make a reviewed version of that video. But getting back to Mateusz Rebecki, He's on a 3-fight win streak in the UFC, 2-fight finish streak over Roosevelt Roberts and Radzhabov. Not the highest level competition, but Rebecki has shown a great grappling base, and in his finishes over Radzhabov, he's shown that he has some dangerous hands as well, and definitely has an entertaining style for the fans outside of the grappling. I definitely see him going far in the UFC simply because he has that deep grappling base and he looks so durable in terms of putting him out. They wanted to match him up against Joel Alvarez. Unfortunately, that matchup got canceled, so his next matchup will be against Diego Ferreira, which I think is a great veteran matchup to really test his mettle and see where he's at. But Mateusz Rebecki, he's a hard-nosed Polish dude. He's going to be out wrestling plenty of dudes for as long as he's in the UFC, and he's got some heavy hands, and he looks hard to put out. So he's going to be a gatekeeper and a problem in this lightweight division, and you're going to see him starting to wash out these veteran fighters for the UFC and acting as a gatekeeper around that 10, 11, 12 spot for the next couple of years. Guys, let me know what you thought of this video. I like doing this broader perspective MMA content that's not really so focused in on what's happening week to week, but more so of the broader perspective of what we should be looking forward to or what we've learned from the past. Definitely stay tuned, guys. I'm going to be putting out more videos, giving you guys some MMA takes that I know you guys are thinking about in your deep subconscious. So stay tuned to Bettrmma, the best ASMR on MMA YouTube. Peace.